Politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners.
I am the Rambling Madman.
I have this feeling, man, because there's a handful of people actually run everything. That's true. It's provable. It's not I'm not a conspiracy nut.
Motherfuckers are so sensitive, the whole country is turned into bitch-ass niggas.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Ramblings of a Madman. This is your host, Mark Ciccarella, a.k.a. the Rambling Madman, coming at you again with another episode. We're on episode 9. It's been a great journey so far, guys, and I'm loving each and every week putting together these episodes. I'm recording this intro on a whim here. I saw something this morning and got pretty fired up. I saw an article from the New York Times. It was an opinion piece basically saying that we should stop using critical thinking when it comes to deciphering information and going down quote-unquote rabbit holes. And that made me fucking furious. I saw that, and they went on to say that because, for example, Bobby Kennedy Jr. is against vaccines, and when people read this, they shouldn't even waste their time going through the information. They should just automatically know that it's wrong. And that fucking made me fired up. The mainstream media, a.k.a. the New York Times, doesn't want you to fucking think for yourself, doesn't want you to critically think, doesn't want you to use common sense and context clues and to determine the truth. And that just made me fired up. I just got back from the gym, I'm a little pumped up, a little swole right now, and I wanted to just get this intro recorded while I'm fired up and while it's fresh in my mind. I want to thank everybody for continuing to support the show and listen and tune in. I've had a tremendous amount of support from lots of people on my website over the past week, and I want to shout out to all the new listeners of the podcast. I greatly appreciate your support and your listening. You guys are making the right steps in terms of moving America and moving the world in the direction of the freedom of thought and the freedom of ideas. Don't forget, if you feel as though the show is doing a very good job and you want to support the show, you can always feel free to donate to my Patreon account. You can find the Patreon account on my website, ramblingmadman.org, and there's a link that says support. There's a button in the top right-hand corner that says support me. You click on that, it'll take you to a page, and there's a link on the page for Patreon. Same thing with the mobile website. The Patreon link is also listed in the description of the episode, wherever you're listening to it, wherever you may be listening to it. I also want to remind people that if you can do so, please listen to the show through my site. I don't like to rely on big tech, and I don't like to rely on big tech to be a home for my podcast or be the most reliable home for my podcast, because as we know with the way the world is, censorship is a very real thing. My podcast can be taken down on any of these big tech sites like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, you name it. This is also going to be on iHeartRadio, but if you could be so kind as to listen to the show through ramblingmadman.org, that would make my day. I mean, you don't have to. I love the fact that people are listening to it. Wherever you want to listen to it. But if it and I understand that the website can be a bit wonky at sometimes in terms of the format for the media player. But if you can deal with it, I greatly appreciate it if you listen to it through my website. If not, keep listening through Spotify. We're gonna keep on keeping on. So yeah, that article by the New York Times had me really fired up. I don't understand how people don't wake up to this shit. The New York Times, one of the biggest media organizations in the world, is telling you to stop critically thinking. Don't think for yourself. Leave it to us to think for you. That's what they're saying, in a nutshell. It's not word for word verbatim, but that's what they're saying. They did literally say to not critically think when it comes to certain things. To let them decipher it. Leave it to the experts. The scientists and the politicians that are experts on this, the ones that are paid buku dollars to give you certain information. Meanwhile, everybody who is a journalist or a scientist or a politician that's not paid off is condemned in the media, is blackballed, is shot, is killed, is fired from their positions in media organizations. Like this show that you're listening to right now is a form of it's a form of journalism. It's citizen journalism. It's journalism that's not produced by any organization. It's produced by me, myself, and I, and produced by you guys when you donate. It's funded by you and me, produced by me, for the people. That's the way journalism should be. But no, journalism today is basically a handful of billionaires form all these companies. Because that's true. A handful of billionaires really own all the media organizations. I think it's like 4 or 5 people own like every single mainstream media organization. Yes, so the people who own Fox News are all in cahoots with the people who own MSNBC. So there's liberals out there and there's staunch conservatives and staunch Republicans. You're all being played by the same people. And that just had me fired up. Had me really had me fucking going there. And I just hated waking up this morning. First thing, as soon as I woke up, that's what I saw. It got me fired up. And it really, like, I hate to keep bringing Epstein up. I wish I didn't have to bring Epstein up. He was a horrible person. But it really makes you realize what has been going on here. It really makes you realize that ever since Epstein came out, ever since the truth about what was happening at Epstein and Epstein's Island and all that shit about the politicians and Bill Clinton, ever since that shit happened, the world went to shit. And I already talked about this in my Pizzagate episode, which was removed by YouTube, by the way. Ever since that shit happened, the world has went to shit. Coronavirus, economic shutdowns, protests, police brutality going viral. If you think for any second that video of George Floyd wasn't planned out to happen, I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm not saying George Floyd didn't die. I'm not saying the police the police officer wasn't a piece of shit. But if you think that it wasn't set up to happen like that, in order to cause all the national outrage in the media and to distract us, you gotta open your eyes. You gotta open your eyes. Because, like that article from the New York Times that I'm talking about, like that article said, it's not worth your time to go down rabbit holes, and conspiracy theory rabbit holes. It's not worth your time to look into them. That's what they say. You know why they don't want you to look into those conspiracy theory rabbit holes? Because at the end of the day, because I spent many hours looking through these rabbit holes, quote unquote rabbit holes, the ones, the YouTube videos and the Reddit posts and the dark web posts and shit like that. Because when you really fucking get down to it, it all comes back to Epstein. Not that Epstein was running things, but the whole Epstein ordeal. It all comes back to the fact that the people who really run this world, the people who really control the way we live and they control our media and they control our politics, and I'm not talking about Trump and Biden. Don't get me wrong. This is not about Trump and Biden. Trump and Biden are fucking puppets. That's all they are. I'm talking about the person that's holding the strings of the puppets. The marionettes. You know, everybody knows what a marionette is. I'm talking about the person that's operating the marionettes. The person that pulls the strings that tells Trump and tells Biden what they have to do. That's what it all comes back to. All those rabbit holes all come back to those people that were buying and selling kids for sex from Epstein. That were sacrificing children. Spirit cooking children. If you don't know what spirit cooking is, don't look it up on Google. Look it up on DuckDuckGo. Because Google will give you some bullshit answer. Spirit cooking is when people take children, they sacrifice the child, and then they eat the child. And they cook it with, like, semen and blood and breast milk and stuff like that. Like, occult black magic ritualistic shit. Spirit cooking, which was mentioned in the Hillary Clinton emails that were leaked. That's what spirit cooking is. That's what all this rabbit hole shit is about. They don't want you to know that shit goes on. That the people who really control this world are sacrificing children in the name of Moloch and Baal and satanic entities. And this isn't a biblical thing either. Because I'm not a Christian, I'm not a Catholic. You can't deny the fact that the people who really run this world are up to some really evil shit. And that's what always kept me up at night. Like, even when I tried to turn my eyes turn the other cheek to this shit and just let it go and then be like, there's nothing I can do. But then the thing that always drew me back to conspiracy theories and to the world and to exposing the lies was the fact that there really is evil behind it. There really are people out there sacrificing children to satanic entities. And those people are all in control of the world that we live in. It's no surprise. It's no coincidence that the Queen of England is like 1 million fucking years old, and she's like never gonna die, and she just keeps fucking like going on, and they have all these fucking pedophile rings, and Prince Andrew was involved in buying sex slaves from Jeffrey Epstein. It's no coincidence that all this shit is happening, that the people who are sticking around forever are all part of this shit, and they're all sacrificing children and eating them and draining their adrenochrome, the adrenochrome which resides in your pineal gland. The pineal gland is your third eye in your head, right in your forehead. It's no coincidence that any of this shit is happening. So I was fired up today. I was really fired up, and I'm glad I was really fired up to get a fresh intro in for you guys. I have a really good episode coming up. I'm going to be talking with a guy named The Odd Man Out. The Odd Man Out has a podcast called The Oddcast, which I think is fucking awesome. And we share a lot of the same views in terms of what's going on in the world politically, and how both sides are being played by the same puppet master. And I'm gonna have him get on and talk about his story and his how he got into believing alternative, quote unquote, alternative truths. And I'm gonna ask him to explain his search for the truth and his passions for helping the world and exposing the lies. I hope you really enjoyed this episode. I'm going to stop here, and we're going to cut right to the episode. We're going to cut right to the conversation between the Odd Man Out and myself. And I hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks for coming on the show. It means a lot to me as a very small podcaster.
Absolutely, man. I'm happy to do it. Thanks for inviting me.
So I guess let's just get into it. I mean, so I kind of wanted to start out and ask you, how you got to like your way of thinking about the world and what goes on behind the scenes, because I know from listening to your show you talk about how you had never gotten on the Trump train, and
yeah,
that's actually something I found like really interesting, because like I know for a lot of people like myself, we saw the appeal in Trump back when he was first running, because he was he said he was for the people, and he was America first, and he was I remember like listening to his inauguration address, and he was saying, no longer will we surrender to the false songs of globalism. And like I was like, oh my God, I can't believe we have a guy like this in there. And then we know what happened after that. But just talk a little bit about what your political background or how you got to where you're at today.
Sure. Yeah. So I got into politics literally just a few months before 9/11. I never had any, because I'm pretty old, man. I'm 45, so I never really had any interest really in politics. I'd been in a rock band for like 10 years. Well, not quite 10 at that time, but like 7. And we actually named our band We Are the Conspiracy, because it was around the time Clinton, the whole Whitewater conspiracy, and we were hearing a lot about that. We were looking for names, and I think we got the name out of the Bible, where it says something like, do not call conspiracy everything the world calls conspiracy. And we're like, that's our name. But anyway, I started listening to talk radio a little bit. Like, I heard that guy, Michael Savage, on radio late one night, and I was just listening to him. Normally, I would just turn something like that off. And for some reason, whatever he was saying, it kind of jived with me, and I started listening to him. And then I swore I would never listen to Rush Limbaugh, because my stepdad used to watch the short-lived TV show of Rush Limbaugh, and I hated it and thought it was stupid. So I started listening to Rush, and then that just kind of made me a fan of talk radio. So I started listening to talk radio a lot. And 9/11 happened during that time, and of course I bought into the whole thing, and thought that the Muslims were coming to get us and take us over and everything. I bought that hook, line, and sinker, and I watched news constantly, 24 hours a day for months, or not 24 hours a day, but every time I could get a chance. And at first I didn't realize what the difference was between CNN and Fox, MSNBC, but I realized pretty quickly that the CNNs and MSNBCs hated George W. Bush. But at the time, I was like a fan. And not to draw this out too long, but I was very conservative for several years, and I still have conservative leanings in certain areas. But I started looking into things, and I think I ran into the book Propaganda by Edward Bernays. It's a famous book. He's known as the father of propaganda, and I didn't know it at the time, but he had worked for the Wilson administration with another guy named George Creel. And Wilson actually formed this agency called the Committee on Public Information because at the time the American people didn't want any part of a war. And he formed that agency to trick the American people into going for our part in World War I. And so they would make flyers and do radio ads and newspaper ads and stuff like that, and they talked people into going for World War I. So I read that book, Propaganda, and he talks in there. I want to say it was written in the 1920s, I believe. I want to say 28,
Okay.
but it could have been a couple of years before that. And he describes in there perfectly at the time how the government had basically already taken over and was propagandizing the people. And he doesn't come straight out and say that, but every other word but that, he basically says. And so, and he's talking about the future and how people would have to, societies would have to be propagandized to get along and to make it work and all that stuff. And anyway, that got me it woke me up, man. It told me, wow, something's going on here, because this was written a long time ago. And can we believe everything we read and everything we see in the news? And, I started having doubts. And I guess a couple of years later, I stumbled upon this podcast, No Agenda show. And they would dive deep into like official documents, declassified documents, and they would talk about allegiances that politicians had behind the scenes and different things like that. And it really woke me up. And by the time Romney and Obama were running against each other, I was totally, I don't want to say woke because that's way overused, but I was on to politics being a big game, and that I knew that we were propagandized constantly. And I started seeing that there wasn't a whole lot of difference between the parties. They kept a few social issues that they would stick out to keep the people divided. But at the top, it seemed like a lot of these guys belonged to a lot of the same groups, like the Council on Foreign Relations is the big one. But other groups like, Aspen Institute and Bilderberg and stuff like that. So really, I know that's a long answer, but that's, it was a slow process. And by the time Trump came around, he'd already ran once or twice before and dropped out early, and I didn't take him serious at all. And I noticed the people I was working with at the time were really starting to take him serious after that first debate. And I kind of liked Rand Paul, but I still wasn't I wasn't going to vote. And I could tell that people were really going for it. And honestly, I didn't believe that Trump was different, mainly because I had read that he had taken a $160 million loan from George Soros for Trump Tower. And that was one of the big, like making my spidey sense go off, because we had just been 20 years on the conservatives talking about how bad George Soros was. And then here's this guy that's taken a whole lot of money from him, and people wouldn't even talk to me about it. So that's kind of started me to doubting the Trump train.
Yeah. I think people were willingly ignorant of Trump,
Yeah.
and myself included. I'm a bit younger than you. I'm only 21. So
Oh,
I was
wow.
in high
Okay.
I was in high school when Trump ran in 2016. I was a junior and senior. I was a senior when he got elected in high school. And
Okay.
so yeah, I think a lot of people were, willingly ignorant. They wanted so bad to have a president that would do the things that he said he was going to do while he was running.
Sure.
And then, so I think that a lot of people were willingly ignorant and just ignored a lot of the red flags in hopes that he was going to be something that he wasn't.
Oh, yeah, and I don't blame anyone at all. I have a lot of friends who are even older than me, and they're still on the Trump train. And it's like, I do blame some of the people who got so carried away with Q and are
Oh
still
yeah.
trying to stick up for that. Um, but no, I don't blame anyone because people had hope, and they, let's face it, the Republicans had the open slot. They had the power vacuum, and the Democrats didn't. And so Trump moved in to fill that vacuum because nobody else really was standing out. I mean, Ted Cruz kind of, but he was kind of lame as far as he didn't have that much charisma or anything. Like he's kind of unlikable,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and Rand Paul fluttered pretty quickly. I mean, it was just he didn't have much of a chance at all. So yeah, I don't blame people, man. And Trump fired people up, and this is what I kind of say to people now. I say, yeah, people fell for him because he was different, but different isn't always good or even better.
No,
Maybe,
exactly.
yeah, he was better than Obama in certain ways, but he was never a conservative to begin with. Not like when I first got into conservatism, it was much more conservative than it is now. And
Exactly. Yeah.
and so Trump wasn't a conservative, and I didn't disagree with all of his stances by any means, but I was by that time that he started running, I was kind of I guess you'd say kind of an anarchist, a right-leaning anarchist, because I
Hmm.
just was kind of like over everything. But I realized, well, he's not a libertarian either. He's just got a few good ideas, or at least he's saying the right things to certain people. But then he got in and he was already spending out of control before even COVID hit, and that was a red flag. And things like giving Israel like a record amount of money and
Yeah,
selling it.
that's right there. That's what really turned me off of Trump is he said all that stuff about being America first and not surrendering to globalism anymore, and then the first thing he does when he gets in office is he pledges allegiance to Israel, and that just like really turned me off, and I was like, yeah, I don't think this guy's our guy
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah, and it's like, people, and I understand Israel for religious purposes. I'm religious, but,
Hmm.
I also understand that we don't trust our own government, and we know that they are mostly corrupt. Or at least one side always thinks the other side's corrupt. So why would you not at least have some skepticism towards a foreign government? So
Hmm.
people can't, they can't separate the Israeli government from the Israeli people. They automatically think they're like this holy government, and it's just
Yeah,
not
yeah,
true.
exactly, exactly.
And like what else? So he was there's a couple other things that he did pretty early on that I was kind of raised red flags. Oh well, speaking of, a couple of years ago, he was with Dianne Feinstein after one of the school shootings, and he was talking about taking the guns. And
Hmm.
Mike Pence actually said something like, I don't know, we can do this without stepping on the Constitution. And then the president actually spoke up and said, well, I think we can take the guns first, and then we'll worry about due process later. And man, I just about shat the bed when I heard that. I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
a
I remember that.
Republican say that? And of course, people will say, well, he didn't mean it like that. But, I think anyone who would have said that previously, even George W. Bush, I think that conservatives would have freaked out because there were quite a few conservatives against George Bush, thanks to InfoWars and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So things have changed a lot.
Yeah, they certainly have. And speaking of Infowars, is what kind of got me into like alternative thinking. I look back at I look at Infowars now, and I don't necessarily like what Alex Jones has become.
Yeah.
But at the time, like when I was in high school and stuff, I'm not gonna lie, it did play a good role in like helping me see that there's a lot of shit going on that a lot of people aren't seeing, and there's a lot of shit that's not being talked about and that's going on. And so I'm grateful for Alex Jones and Infowars,
Yeah.
but you're right at the same time, like he's I don't understand why he's so like involved with Trump, and like he's like pledges allegiance to Trump, like. And that even like back when I was in high school and when Trump first got elected, I couldn't understand like we're supposed to have caution here. We're supposed to be treading with caution here, and
Right.
it just seemed like Alex Jones has never had that caution. Like he was always all in on Trump, and I never understood that.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. He's, he brings out that kind of macho, we're gonna kick ass attitude,
Yeah.
and that's cool and everything. But like, politics is way more nuanced than just saying stuff like that, And it's so easy to fool the masses, because when people are in a group, they're easily led anyway with the energy and I don't know the emotion and everything. But yeah, I learned a lot. I listened to Alex Jones some too, and Alex knows a lot of stuff. And there's
he
no
definitely
doubt
knows
about
a lot
it.
of stuff.
Yeah, he's like a Rolodex of hidden history. And another great thing that I don't think anybody could take away from him is he had phenomenal guests on, back in the day. All these whistleblowers and different important people who were saying important things that nobody had ever said on terrestrial radio before, and really bringing information to the forefront that otherwise people would have never known. And so I got to hand it to him too. And I personally feel like this is just my hunch. I could be totally wrong, but I kind of feel like after he got divorced, I feel like he probably lost a ton of money, and he realized that the MAGA movement was a moneymaker. And I kind of
that
feel
could
like,
definitely be it. Yeah.
I mean, I know it's a simple thing, but man, money really changes people. Once
Yeah.
you've made, I've always heard once you make a lot of money, then you will do anything to keep it. So.
Yeah, I mean, at one point, Alex Jones he infiltrated Bohemian Grove,
Right.
and
Right.
and then he's like, and then now it's just crazy that he infiltrated Bohemian Grove, and now like the thing he's most known for is they're turning the frogs gay, and like
Yeah. Yeah, and he's funny. I mean, he's so funny, man. He says some
Yeah,
of the funny stuff, and I think he does a lot of that because he's built his character, and of course he plays it up, and it's fun. It's fun to watch, Another thing that kind of put me off about Trump too was he appointed Wilbur Ross. I forget the position he appointed him to, but Wilbur Ross was a 25-year Rothschild agent and worked for one of their biggest banks. And I was like, man, if that had been a Democrat, the conservatives would have been going crazy. And so I think things like that and things like, he did appoint, I think about 10, maybe a dozen Council on Foreign Relations members.
yeah,
I think General McChrystal was a council member, and then he replaced McChrystal with Bolton, who was like a horrible guy, And Bolton was actually in PNAC, Project for New American Century, and they were that group that came out of the Council on Foreign Relations. I think it was Rumsfeld. There was a bunch of people, but Rumsfeld, Cheney, Condoleezza Rice, and oh gosh, I forget, Elliot Abrams, who is another guy that Trump appointed. They were in this PNAC, and they came up with this study before 9/11, just months before, saying that to get the money and the funding they needed to bring the Department of Defense up to standards, like technically, they needed a new Pearl Harbor. A Pearl Harbor type event.
Yeah,
And then
no,
boom.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So, he appoints John Bolton, and as I said, I know K.T. McFarland was Council on Foreign Relations, Anthony Scaramucci. I don't know. I've got them all written down somewhere. But, with Bolton, I mean, he was one of the worst ones, and I just couldn't figure out why, he would do that. And people, I would say something to people, especially like Q people, and they would be like, oh, you just don't understand the plan. And I'm like, well, I understand that he's appointing people who are considered to be enemies to conservatism and libertarianism and the Constitution. What else do I need to know?
Exactly. So, one second here.
Yeah, man.
So what would you say was your smoking gun in terms of like seeing the bigger picture and what's going on behind what's going on behind the scenes.
Just like, you mean in terms of the Trump administration or altogether?
Altogether.
I think that the cronyism, really honestly, the Council on Foreign Relations membership opened my eyes. I was reading books like None Dare Call It Conspiracy and James Perloff's Shadows of Power. And I'll tell you another book that really opened my eyes was The True Story of Bilderberg, Daniel Estulin.
Okay.
Now, that book is fantastic. And it ties in the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, and Bilderberg. And so many of those guys have been in presidential administrations. And it's both sides, it's Democrats and Republicans. Yeah. So I think that was a big thing. And then also seeing a lot of the things that the CIA and the FBI have done over the years. And they're also connected to the council. Almost every CIA director has been a council member. So I think those kind of things, man, because it kind of is one big party at the top, I mean, they have some differences, and there's some people I'm sure that don't get along, but you either belong to that club or you don't, and
yeah, exactly. And that's always been one of the things I've said about Trump is people always like to say Trump's an outsider and he's not like the other politicians, and I just could never understand why people would think that. I mean, first of all, his administration is made up of CFR members. And then on top of that, like, he's an elite billionaire from New York City.
Right.
And you don't get to be an elite billionaire. He was friends with Jeffrey Epstein. You don't get to be an elite billionaire. You don't get to be friends with Jeffrey Epstein by being an outsider. You have to be doing something. You have to be connected on the inside by doing something. I'm not saying you're involved with Epstein. He was involved with Epstein. I'm not making any accusations. I'm just saying you don't get to where he was by being an outsider. And a lot of people don't see that, and it really surprises me.
Yeah, that's true, man. And he's been around forever. And another thing about Trump and him winning was he already had the name recognition, and that's one of the hardest, biggest goals to overcome. And that's if you believe presidents are elected. I don't know, looking back, and people tell me I'm crazy, but I've had a theory for a long time now that perhaps he was selected, or at least allowed to win because
Trump.
Yeah. And hear me out, because I know this sounds crazy, but because I believe, being a conservative for a long time, that conservatives hated Hillary. There's no question, but it was almost a love-hate relationship because the Clintons have been around forever, and so I think that they would have, if she had won, people would have hated it and they would have complained and this, that, and the other, but you wouldn't have seen rioting in the streets. You probably wouldn't have seen Antifa. You probably wouldn't have seen Q. You wouldn't have seen, all this crap, how the Biden administration, now they've got this big excuse because of the Capitol riot, or whatever you want to call it, insurrection, which it really wasn't, but they're using that as an excuse to basically, I think, try to eventually outlaw any dissent of what the status quo wants to do. You wouldn't have been able to do that. And you also, I think you would have had division, but I don't think you would have had the division that you have now because Trump was so good at it, He was just so good.
That's actually one of the things, like, I totally 100% believe is that he was selected, and his role, he had a job to do, and his job was to get us to where we're at now. And and a lot of that, I believe, I don't know how you feel about this. Maybe I can get your opinion on this. What do you think about Bernie Sanders and what happened in 2016? Because my personal opinion is that what happened in 2016 with them, taking the nomination away from him and giving it to Hillary Clinton, I feel like they had a hunch that if Bernie Sanders got that nomination for the Democratic Party, that it would have been almost too hard for them to say that Trump had won the election. In other words, I feel like the voter outcome and the turnout would have been so much in favor of Bernie that they wouldn't have been able to just come out and say Trump won and just hand it to Trump. Meanwhile, Hillary and Trump were almost hated equally, enough to where you could believe like it was almost a 50-50 election, and you could believe that it could have went one way or the other. But I just can't see it being I can't see that it could have been the same way had Bernie been given the chance to have the nomination.
That's a good outlook there, man. Because I hadn't really thought too much about that, but that makes total sense. And even though Bernie wasn't exactly, he's not like an authentic socialist. I mean, he had a lot of socialist leanings. And dude, we're seeing right now this Democratic Party is the biggest corporate party I've ever seen. I mean, any person on the left that tries to say the Republicans are big government, big corporation is ridiculous. I mean, they are, but dude, Joe Biden is in bed with. I mean, look, the defense industry went for him. The pharmaceutical industry backed him. I mean, it's unbelievable. And then, of course, he's picked 20 some odd Council on Foreign Relations members for his cabinet. And you look at the corporate members of the Council on Foreign Relations, it's Exxon, it's Bank of America, it's Citgo, it's Facebook and Google, and every company that sucks,
Exactly.
So, yeah, I mean, I think you're onto something there. It would have swung the pendulum a little too far towards kind of beating back some of the corporatism. And, I don't think they wanted that at all.
Yeah, exactly. And there's even been talk about, the DNC using the Dominion software. Everybody's talking about how the Dominion software was used against Trump in this election. And there's been talk about how the Dominion software was used against Bernie in 2016 to get him out of the conversation for getting the nom. And I just it's just so crazy how there's so many things that are connected here, and sorry, and that even now in 2020 or back in 2020, the same thing that they did in fucking 2016 is what they did in 2020, and Bernie kind of really didn't say anything. He just kept his mouth shut.
Right. Yeah, because I think he knew that he knows what kind of beast system it is, man. He knows like how the cronyist thing works because he's been around it so many years, So he knows how it's just a bunch of corporatism and it's like the mafia basically.
Exactly. I mean, I can't say I necessarily blame him because who knows what happened back in 2016? I mean, what he was told.
Oh yeah.
And because I mean, how deep the corruption and the evil deeds go with the people who really run this world, and I can't say that if something did happen, I can't say I blame him for not spilling the beans, no matter what his politics may be. But
right.
But,
and you even go back even further. I think it was the 2012 election. Maybe it was 2008, man. I'm kind of losing track, but it was the last time that Ron Paul ran, and he was killing it. Killing it. And when he got to Iowa, which they say if you win Iowa, you've got a big chance of being the nominee, the media, CNN and Fox, even Fox was not even covering the fact that he was winning in Iowa. Mm-hmm. And he won that Iowa caucus, and the Republicans went in and changed some kind of law with the elections, and totally screwed his chances of winning up. And it barely got any press. And there's actually there's a documentary on it that tells all about it, and it actually shows. Like it goes to like footage at the caucus of him winning the caucus, and then it'll show the updates from the news. They don't even mention Ron Paul. And that's how bad it was. They were all in cahoots,
Exactly.
And again, I think it's the same reason, because he would have gotten rid of a lot of the cronyism and corporatism too. Because even though he's on the other side of Bernie, real libertarians don't want the government involved with private business. They want separation of corporations and state. So yeah, it's such a rigged game, man. It's and that's another reason I just can't see Trump getting past every. That whole system, because I think that they can put whoever they want in and make them win,
Exactly. And that's another thing I don't necessarily understand from, Trump supporters. I work with a Trump supporter, and he doesn't know he's a QAnon guy, but he is a QAnon guy. Like he doesn't necessarily know what QAnon is, but he goes along with the QAnon theories. And so anyway, I asked him, I'm like, so with all this shit that went on with the election, what would you do if, they said, all right, we're just going to redo the election and we're going to have a fair election this time? Would you still go out and vote? And he's like, yeah, oh, hell yeah, I would go out and vote, and we got to get out there and show them our numbers, and we got to show them that what they did was wrong. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, you just lost an election that was so blatantly rigged, and like, and you'd go out there and you'd give them the power again and just lose again because you want to show them who's boss, quote unquote, show them who's boss. I just don't get that. It's like, the odds are stacked against you, and like you want to continue. In my opinion, what you do by going out and voting is you give them power. You're giving them the power to say, this is who you can choose from, and you can cast your vote, and that's it. That's what you can do. That's your right as a citizen, but it doesn't go any further than that. And I think we could send a bigger message if what if on election day back in November, if nobody went out to the polls. Everybody was like, fuck that. I'm not voting for either one of these assholes. We need to figure something else out, and nobody went out to the polls. I think that would send an even bigger message than if, like everybody went out to the polls. Because this election season was the most dystopian thing I've ever seen in my life. Yeah. Like, it's especially with all the commercials and like the advertisements that went in to trying to get people to get out there and vote. Like, I've never seen anything like that before. Like, I've never seen a message trying to be sent that hard, and it's really scary where we're at today.
It really is, man. I think that, record number of money spent on the election. I forget the amount now, but it was unbelievable. It was in the billions. And, you think about how I've got a theory too that's like, and I don't know, I've argued with people about this, but I kind of feel like, at least in the modern times, but maybe forever, but at least maybe the last 60, 80 years, I feel like the president is actually the divider in chief, because I feel like they need to get somebody in there who's going to keep the people divided. One side's going to love him, the other side's going to hate him. They're going to it'll keep the populace kind of focused on whatever the president says, and he's fighting with the Speaker of the House or a certain senator or whatever, and they don't pay attention to what's going on in the background. And of course, they don't look into the deeper side of politics, and they think that everything they hear on the news is all politics. They have no idea about this other world, and I feel like that's the main job of a president. And Obama was a divider, Trump was a divider, and George Bush, the things he did, he definitely divided the nation, and and Clinton was a divider too. So it's like,
yeah, I'd agree with that. I really like that theory.
And it goes right along, it kind of goes right along with the Hegelian dialect. It's like problem, reaction, solution. The president comes in and he's kind of a problem. He creates a problem for the opposition, and then they have to do something and react to it. And then, next time comes around with the next presidential election, that's their so-called solution. And it depends on whether the deep state and the elite want to take him out and put another president in or not. But it's kind of like he goes in and causes a problem, and that way the deep state can kind of push the people however they want them to react, everything accordingly.
Yeah, I gotta say, I really agree with that. Maybe, I don't know about 80 years, but I'd say definitely at least since Kennedy.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, I'd say you're spot on with that.
Yeah, and they have to have a divided public. It's divide and conquer. It's simple, man. They've probably been doing this for thousands of years, but if the people really start to dive into stuff like you and I would, can you imagine if all of a sudden tomorrow, say 65% of people started looking into things deeply. I mean, people would be so outraged and appalled at all the things that have happened over, modern history that it would just be unbelievable. But, that's not going to happen because people, they're going to stay focused on other things. And obviously, you can't blame people for staying busy or, or having hobbies because you can't, stay focused on this stuff all the time or you'll be like me.
It's definitely like you're in for a rude awakening once you dive into this world and you like accept the fact that everything's just up to some sort of fuckery, and it's like once you go in, you can never go back. Like,
oh yeah.
Once you realize, the strings that are being attached to the marionettes, and you see who's holding those strings, it's like you can't go back. This is who you are now, and I feel like a lot of it has to do with in terms of like why people don't come to this way of thinking more often, and a lot of it has to do with comfortability, and people are just way too comfortable in their lives, and you can see it even now with COVID. I mean, how many times have you heard people say, "Oh, just wear the mask and get your COVID vaccine so it can all be over"? It's not that they care about COVID, and they're not scared of COVID. They just wanted to go back to being normal.
Yeah.
And I just when I hear that in my head, what I hear is like, what I think is, how can you say that it's going to go back to normal? I mean, it's been a year already. We've been doing this shit, this quarantine shit, and you just think it's going to go back to normal if I wear my mask and get my COVID vaccine? I mean, Fauci already said we're going to be wearing masks until 2022,
right?
And that's if people are getting vaccinated. And the fact that people think this could go back to normal and are optimistic that we're going to get back to where we were just a year ago, it boggles my mind, especially when you take into consideration like all the things like they're trying to prevent you from getting on flights without having a vaccine passport. You see in Israel, you can't buy food at grocery stores without having your vaccine, showing them that you have a vaccine. And it's just fucking wild to me. And especially since you can't, they already say the vaccine doesn't stop transmission of the virus. So I don't understand where the whole thing with you can't get on a plane if you don't have your vaccine, when the vaccine doesn't even stop the transmission anyway. So if you're in contact with the virus, you're going to spread it even if you had the vaccine. It's just like so many things don't add up, and people just like willingly eat it and just keep eating it and eating it.
They do, man, and they've told us so many different things too. And it's like you look at people who are not the least bit skeptical; they're believing every single thing, and I'm like, don't you at least find it weird that the CDC and everybody else has told us so many contradictory things? But some people, it's kind of like you're either a skeptic or you're not, and those people that are not, you cannot really do anything to make them become skeptics, and they'll just have to learn on their own if they ever do learn. And I know in my experiences too that I talk to people over the years, and I've had them tell me, hey, I know the government's crooked, I know that all these things are going on, but I don't want to know. I don't really want to know. And I'm like, well, at least if you know and you're aware of some of this stuff, you can avoid some of it in your own life. But I think people just would rather, bury their heads in the sand, kind of like you're saying, and just thinking that things will get comfortable again, for them.
Yeah. It's, man, we live in such dark times. It's like, it's just so hard to think that a year ago, like, things were so different. And things were shitty a year ago, don't get me wrong, but things were so different compared to where we're at now, and it's just...
Another thing that, and I don't know why it didn't occur to me earlier, but I think it was just a couple of weeks ago, and Agenda 21 was, the UN, United Nations Agenda 21, that was 2021. That wasn't...
Yeah,
they didn't just
exactly,
they didn't just put that in there. I mean, there was billions of dollars spent on Agenda 21. Mm-hmm. They've been planning that even before they started trying to implement it. They'd been planning it for like 10 years. It is 2021. They're going for a world government. The Green New Deal is going to be part of it. And another thing, going back to the Council on Foreign Relations, They are celebrating 100 years this year. They started
not know
in
that.
1921, and so now it's 100 years of the council, and they're all about world government. That's why they, were put together. So I think these global powers are at play, and they're going for it. They saw their opportunity.
It's like the stars are aligning, like the dystopian stars.
Exactly.
It's like the perfect storm brewing up for them, and that is fucking wild.
Yeah, and it's like they are coming out and talking about these public-private partnerships. And if you go back to Event 21, the whole thing that was the exercise in November, the November before COVID hit, the pandemic exercise, which John Hopkins was involved in, Gates was involved in, Fauci, I believe Fauci was involved in it. And they talked in there about public-private partnerships being the answer, which is basically a fancy term for fascism. Mm-hmm. But I was looking at the Rockefeller lockstep program that was I think it was from 2010, and it was about a global pandemic and what could be done about it. And I read most of that thing. It was awful to read, and they kept talking about public-private partnerships. And then just last night, I'm reading this book about the Trilateral Commission, and this guy is Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was like one of his assistants. I don't think he was Secretary of State, but he was something like that, National Security Advisor or something like that. Mm-hmm. He was also an advisor to Obama. This guy wrote books. Like in 1969, he wrote a book called Between Two Ages, and he's a big globalist, and he was talking about in there how we would have to build a new world order, and you would see the public sector coming together with the private sector. And so they have had this corporatism idea for a long time, man, and they're trying to seize on it, and so you're seeing all these smaller businesses close, and of course, the other monopolies are thriving. So I'm thinking, they're getting us used to this universal basic income by giving people, the $1,200, the different, the money from the stimulus. And I don't, I'm not complaining or saying people don't need help. I'm not saying that, but they're trying to get people used to the universal basic income or national basic income.
They definitely are. That's definitely what it is. And especially when you see, like everybody's talking about how bad it is, for people are losing jobs and because of the coronavirus, and people have no money. But especially here in Pennsylvania, I'm just outside of Philadelphia. Here in Pennsylvania, people are getting like crazy amounts of money on unemployment, like because of the coronavirus. There's all kinds of bonuses and stuff. People are making more money on unemployment than a lot of people are working 40 hours a week, and it just drives me crazy that happens. But and not to rain on anybody's parade or say, oh, you shouldn't have. It's just the fact that like people are getting so used to these handouts, people are literally willing to sell their soul for $600 here, $1,200 here, and like it's just so wild to me. And we're getting ready to get the $1,400 check next, and like you sold your soul, you sold like your life, your way of life to get occasional checks of $1,000.
Yeah, and to think that is not going to come with a price. They're setting us up for the universal or national basic income, mm-hmm. and when they get that, dude, you know as well as I do, when they get you on they'll get you on government health care or whatever they call it, mm-hmm. sort of like Obamacare, and then they'll get you on some kind of national basic income, and they'll have you solely dependent on them for most things, most necessities. And then you'll probably only be able to spend their money at certain places that are in bed with their crony corporatists. Like,
and don't
Walmart.
forget, you're not going to get any of this unless you have the vaccine.
Exactly. You'll have to have the vaccine, and you'll have to obey. You're not going to be able to complain about any government policies or anything they're doing that you think is, illegal or corrupt. You're going to have to shut your mouth. And if you want to have a decent, credit score, it's going to be sort of like the Chinese credit score system.
Yeah, like I know Charlie Robinson talks a lot about it on his podcast, the social credit score.
Yeah.
Aspect.
Yeah, I saw the. I think it was last month. I did a video about it. I was just kind of reading the article. So the International Monetary Fund did this study, and they're pretty heavy duty. They did this study to see if it would be a good idea to judge people's credit score based on their internet search history. And I'm like, are you
Yeah.
kidding me? I mean, we're here, dude. If they've got the study and they put it out in the press, that means they're really thinking about it.
Yeah.
So, can you imagine? I mean, nobody that does an alternative media podcast would be able to have any credit because we would have violated every freaking term, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Because they're going to make it so terrible you can't search up anything but something stupid, you know?
Yeah. That is
Great.
that is a fucking wild case there.
Yeah. I hope that people will start to, I mean, that's another thing that scared me, and you may be able to relate to this too, man. Is some of my conservative friends, they don't seem to be very skeptical. Nothing like what I thought they would be with this whole COVID thing. It's like I thought you at least would not buy into all this, and they were just keeping quiet. They're not saying anything about it, and it's kind of weird, man. I didn't expect that.
I actually haven't come across that. I'm not going to say I haven't come across that. I have come across it, but not in the ways you would think. I know a lot of conservative people who are like very like they're do-gooders and stuff. They do have some resistance to the masks and everything, but when it comes to like the vaccine and everything, they seem to be like right on board with it.
Right.
And or maybe they're not right on board with it, but they're not really giving it any thought. They're just like, oh, this is something I got to do now, and that's where it ends. And it's so yeah, I can definitely see what you're saying there.
Yeah, I think people are, I know some older people too, and people kind of are starting to get older, and it's like, yeah, I guess they're scared, and I don't blame them, and honestly, because I don't have cable and I don't very seldom ever watch the news, but like a lot of people I know still watch the news all the time, and even though they say it's fake news, they're still subjected to it, and I think it scares the hell out of them, and they don't realize it. And if they would get away from it, for even a week or two, and realize how much propaganda is filling it's filling their heads full of propaganda and fear,
And that's exactly what it's doing.
yeah, I think that they would see things in a whole new light, but they're not going to.
Yeah, I don't watch the news at all, except I go to the gym a lot, at least 5 days a week, and in the cardio section, there's all the TVs there, and every single TV is either set to MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News. They have one TV that's set to a local news station, and then they might have like USA or TNT on one of the other screens, or maybe ESPN. But for the most part, it's usually a CNN or MSNBC, and it drives me literally insane. Like every time I'm doing cardio and I look up at this screen in front of me, and like all you see is the coronavirus death ticker. Just like it just drives me fucking insane.
Oh man!
Like people just fall so easily for this, and they're making so much money off of this fear that people have, and it makes my blood boil. It really does.
Oh yeah, man.
Especially when they just ignore the about this the 6% stat from the CDC from a few months ago.
I probably heard it, but refresh my memory.
So the CDC a few months ago, I think it was back in late August, they came out and said that 6% of the deaths of coronavirus are actually people who died from the virus. The virus killed them. And 94% of the deaths of the virus are people who died with the virus. So they're people who died, from car accidents, or maybe they were 800 pounds and had a heart attack, or maybe they were shot in the face, but they had coronavirus, so it's still added into that 500,000 death toll that we just got today. So even if you bump that up, say the statistic went up. Say the statistic went up over the past few months since August. Say it went up to 10%. That still means we're at 50,000 deaths. We're not at 500,000 deaths. We're at 50,000 deaths. If you bump the statistic up, if it's even less than that, if we don't adjust the statistic, and nobody seems to care about that statistic, and I for the life of me, I can't figure out why nobody cares about that statistic.
Yeah, I forgot about that. I remember when was it Dr. Bird? Is that her last name? The lady that was coming out with Trump and Fauci. Yeah. So I remember her early on coming out and saying, "Well, we're counting every death as a COVID death if the person has COVID." She said that on the national news, and nobody, it was talked about for a couple of weeks, but then it was just kind of forgotten about because, the headlines kept changing and it's just like I've never seen so much BS in my life over one thing, and like my wife's a nurse practitioner, and two of our best friends are nurses, and I know a couple other people that work in the healthcare, and it's like you hear these stories, like at my wife's hospital, when the patient count was up a few weeks ago, so they were actually admitting people to the hospital if they had so much as a sore throat or a runny nose, if they tested positive for COVID. They might not be very ill, they might just have those mild symptoms, but they would qualify to be put in the hospital if they wanted to go in. And they also qualify for some kind of plasma, something or other, I forget now. So no wonder the counts were up. They were bringing people in who didn't even need to be in. And also, I talked to a couple of my nurse friends, and they were saying, they're keeping people much longer than they normally would, even if they're not very sick. Because normally you go in the hospital, they're trying to get your ass out of there. I don't care if you've had your foot amputated.
Exactly.
In a few hours, they're trying to get you out and get the next dude in, So it was really, obviously they were getting money for that because there's no way they would keep people in the hospital longer than they needed them to.
Yeah.
And then you go into the PCR tests. Of course, I'm sure you know about that. It's like the inventor, Kerry Mullis, of the PCR test. He said it was only supposed to be spun a certain amount of times, and if you spin it too much, it'll say.
I was just talking to somebody about this earlier today.
Right. It's the more you spin it, the more positives it's gonna have, and who knows how many times they were spinning it. I heard at one point, one report said 40 something. And supposedly now they're spinning them less, so the counts are down less. So it's like, how do you even know how many of these people had it?
Exactly. And I remember, I forget which podcast I was listening to. I think it might have been Charlie Robinson's podcast, and he had a guest on. The guest was talking about how the way the test is designed. It's designed in a way so that like you might have like a common cold. But one of the factors of your common cold is going to set that test off and make it look like you have coronavirus, and then these tests can be detecting any number of like illnesses or just common colds or influenzas, and they're designed to just go off as COVID. That's crazy to me.
Yeah, and you think about the common cold. I mean, not the common cold, excuse me, the flu. And I've not known one person who said they've tested positive for the flu. In fact, another one of my nurse friends, I've known this guy since I was 5 years old. One of my best friends in the world. And he was telling me that they're not even recommending tests for the flu anymore if somebody comes in with flu-like symptoms. They just
that's what people are talking about now. The flu has disappeared.
Yeah,
and the thing, like 90% of the flu of the cases where we would be at normally in the year, like we're only at like 10%, so like 90% of the flu disappeared.
Right, and I heard some local guy, some bigwig on the radio here, somebody ask him about that. And he said, "Well, it's because people are wearing masks." Well, if that's the case, why is that not keeping the COVID counts way down too? So,
oh my God,
of course he would try to say that it was keeping the COVID counts down, but there is just so much BS. And now that they've pulled this crap off with all this fear mongering, I was asking somebody the other day. I said, "You think that if the flu does magically come back, which it's they've been pushing that flu shot deal for years now. It's getting worse and worse. It's like you can practically get it at McDonald's. But like, if the flu does come back, do you think they're going to make people wear masks and do these lockdowns again? I mean, now that they know they can get away with them."
Yeah.
I mean, it's just kind of crazy to think about the power we've given them.
It is. It's. And I'm going to say right now, I don't believe we're ever going to get back. I mean, I guess that's not very optimistically thinking, but I don't think we're going to get back to where we were even a year ago. And
No.
and it's kind of scary. I mean, to think that this is probably how life is from now on out. And it's also a little bit scary to think about what's going to happen if, you know, people like you and I, like, if we don't conform, what's
Right.
going to happen to us and what the choices we're going to be forced to have to make.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
and it's a whole new world out there, man. And
It is, man. Brave new world. Yeah.
it is. And I think this is a good place to stop. And I think you've been a tremendous guest for me, and I want to thank you again for coming on my show.
Absolutely.
And you know, I'm such a small podcaster, and like I had Prepper Nurse 1 on my channel a few weeks ago, and like you guys are and compared to me, are in my opinion big guys, and it means a whole lot to me, and I really appreciate what you did, and I mean I don't have near a big audience, but why don't you go ahead and tell my audience where they can listen to your show and find your show and your content?
Absolutely, man. Well, you know, we're a small community, but we need to support each other, dude, because they're with the censorship, they're making it harder and harder for people to get content out there, and they only want that corporate approved content. I call it GovCorp because they work together so much. But yeah, so I appreciate it, and I'll come back on again, man, in the future. Just to
Yeah,
get a hold
I'd
of me.
love that.
Yeah, so the easiest place for people to get in touch with me if they want to just talk to me or see the things that I do, it's _ the odd man out on Twitter and Instagram. And then if you want to, in my Instagram profile, it's got a link tree to all my links and to the podcast, which is called The Oddcast, featuring the odd man out. And that's on all your platforms pretty much. But if you can't find it, go to alternatecurrentradio.com, and it's on there with a lot of other great shows. So I really appreciate it, man. Thank you very much.
Yeah, man. Thank you for coming on the show, and you know, have a wonderful day, evening, night, wherever you are. And yeah, I'll definitely keep in touch with you.
Very cool, man. Take care.
Yep. Okay, guys, and that about does it for this episode of Ramblings of a Madman. This was episode 9. I hope you really enjoyed hearing me ramble on with the odd man out. I really love that he and I have the same sort of political opinions and way of looking at the theater distraction that is U.S. politics. He's a really interesting guy. He knows his shit, and I'm glad I had a chance to have him on here and expose him to my audience and show him off and hopefully work with him in the future. Before I get on out of here, I want to remind everybody that this is episode 9. Next week will be episode 10. After episode 10, I'm going to take a week or 2 off just so I can, gather all my ideas together and plan out, the next 10 episodes in advance, and try to get as much planned out in advance as I can, and just so I can have a better schedule for you guys, and hopefully let you guys know what's coming in advance. So I'm hoping you guys are all enjoying this content. I have some other really good guests lined up. Some of them big, some of them small, some of them not really on the podcasting radar yet, but all of them have some great and wonderful ideas to share with you and to conversate about. And remember, that's what this is all about. It's about the freedom of ideas and the freedom of thought, the freedom of conversation, and to keep the conversation going, because if we keep the conversation going, we can keep freedom going. As long as we're talking and we're sharing these ideas, then we're still alive. The movements are still alive. If they silence us, then the movements are dead. So I want to remind everybody to keep on keeping on. Remember that we are all gods out here, and have a wonderful day.